The dark figure in the hallway. I was about 10 years old when I had my first paranormal experience. My family had just moved into a large, old house that had been vacant for years. It was the kind of house that looked beautiful on the outside, but gave off a strange feeling as soon as you stepped inside. The hallway was long and narrow, and every time I walked through it, I felt a sense of dread. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was lying in my room reading a book. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was my parents, but then I realized the steps were too slow and deliberate, almost like someone was creeping around. Curious but nervous, I decided to investigate. I crept into the hallway and froze. At the far end, standing in the shadows, was a tall, dark figure. It had no face, just a solid silhouette. I couldn't move. The air felt thick, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly started moving toward me, and I bolted back to my room. I slammed the door and hid under my covers, terrified. The next morning, I told my parents, but they just brushed it off as a bad dream. However, the feeling of being watched never left me. Over the next few weeks, I would hear footsteps in the hallway even when I was alone, and sometimes the lights would flicker or turn off on their own. Years later, we found out that the previous owner of the house had passed away in the hallway, and many people believed his spirit never left. I haven't forgotten that dark figure, and I still wonder what it wanted from me. The haunted hotel room. A few years ago, I traveled to a small town for a business trip. I was staying at an old hotel that had a lot of charm, but a history of being haunted. I didn't think much of it, dismissing the stories as urban legends. But the night I spent there, I quickly changed my mind. I checked into my room, a cozy space with vintage furniture and a view of the town square. Everything seemed normal until I began to settle in for the night. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of soft whispers coming from the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers were too clear. They seemed to be speaking in a language I didn't understand. I sat up in bed, heart racing, but the room was still. The whispers stopped, but then the temperature dropped drastically. I could see my breath in the air, and the chill was unbearable. Just then, the door to the bathroom swung open on its own. I was frozen in place, not sure what to do. I finally mustered the courage to get up and check the room, but when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. The whispers returned, but this time, they were louder and closer. It sounded like a woman's voice, crying for help. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left the hotel at 4 a.m., terrified. The next morning, I asked the front desk about the room, and the receptionist seemed strangely familiar with the experience. She mentioned that several guests had reported similar encounters in that room, and many believed the hotel was haunted by the spirit of a woman who had tragically died there years ago. I never stayed at that hotel again, and I'll never forget that night. The haunted cabin in the woods. It was a weekend trip that I would never forget. A group of friends and I decided to rent a remote cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. The cabin had a rustic charm, but an eerie feeling that was hard to ignore. The surrounding woods were dense, and the only sounds we could hear were the occasional chirp of birds or the rustling of leaves. On the second night, after a long day of hiking, we gathered around the fireplace, chatting and laughing. But around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The air turned cold, and we all started hearing strange noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth, and at one point, we could even hear a door creaking open and shut. At first, we thought it was one of us playing a prank, but when we checked, no one was upstairs. The house felt unnervingly still, yet the noises continued. One of my friends, who had been staying in the upstairs bedroom, said she felt like something was watching her from the corner of the room. She swore she saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. The next morning, we did some research and found out that the cabin had once belonged to a family who mysteriously disappeared over a decade ago. Some said they'd heard voices in the woods, while others claimed they had seen shadows moving inside the cabin at night. We didn't stay another night. The eerie noises and the cold chill were enough to convince us that the cabin was indeed haunted. We left immediately, but the unsettling feeling of being watched stayed with me for a long time.